Okay, welcome everyone. If we could all take our seats and I will use the official, whatever this is, NAEHS gavel here. So I guess that's the start of the National Advisory Environmental Health Sciences Council, February 21st to 22nd. So welcome everyone. And so I'm Rick Wycheck, the director of NAEHS, and here with the acting director of DERT, Dr. David Balshaw, as well as many members of council here in person, and members of the senior leadership committee are joining as well. So I guess to kick things off, I read the Sunshine Act. And so pursuant to the government in the Sunshine Act, all aspects of this meeting are open to the public except for the review, discussion, and evaluation of grant applications and related information. So the only council member that's not present, can't make it this time, is Phil Bourne. But thanks to all of the rest of you for taking time and joining us for the next couple of days. So David, I guess back to you.
Thank you, Rick. So I'm going to moderate the introductions because we have several people. We're getting used to this hybrid format. We have several people who are on the Zoom, several people that are in the room. So just to make sure that we get everybody, I will call on as we go through. As Rick said, Phil Bourne is not able to join us for council this week. Other staff or other council members will be in and out. And I'm not sure that everybody is on the Zoom right now. So first is Lynn Goldman. I don't see Lynn in the Irva, would you like to introduce yourself? Poke a little bit.
Hello, can you hear me? All right. Irva Hertz-Picciotto, I'm from the University of California, Davis.
Andre Holian.
Andre Holian, University of Montana.
Johnny Ingram.
Yeah, Dave Benet. Good morning. Janny Ingram from Northern Arizona University.
Harry Kavanaugh.
Good morning, everyone. Terry Kavanaugh, University of Washington.
And Gary Miller.
Gary Miller, Columbia University.
Trevor Penning.
Trevor Penning, University of Pennsylvania.
Marla Perez-Lugo.
Marla Perez-Lugo, Professor of Sociology at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley.
Karen Vasquez.
Oh, here I am. Good morning. Karen Vasquez, University of Texas at Austin.
We have one ad hoc member of council. This is a person who is joining council, but has not yet fully cleared all of the reviews through the department yet. So is participating as an ad hoc member of council this round, and that's Patricia Henderson.
Yeah, Dave Bennett, calling from the beautiful Black Hills of South Dakota, the homelands of the Lakota Dakota people. And I'm a senior scientist at the Black Hills Center for American Indian Health.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to working with you, Patricia. And then we have 3 ex officio members representing other federal agencies to council. First is Yulia Carroll from CDC.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Andrew Geller.
Andrew Geller, Environmental Protection Agency, Office of Research and Development.
Susie Fitzpatrick.
Susie Fitzpatrick, Senior Advisor for Toxicology, Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, U.S. Food and Drug Administration.
Thank you, Susie. And then we'll introduce members of the senior leadership team, starting with my left, Dr. Wycheck.
Okay, Rick Wycheck, director of NAEHS and the director of the National Toxicology Program.
Good morning. I'm Gwen Coleman. I'm the director of the Office of Scientific Coordination, Planning and Evaluation.
I'm Jan Hall. I'm the clinical director at NAEHS.
Good morning, Jay Ingrid Mathis. I'm the executive officer here at NAEHS.
And Trevor.
Trevor Archer, Deputy Director, NIHS.
And I don't think Daryl is on the Zoom yet. Daryl Zeldin, our scientific director, will also be joining us this afternoon. Members of DLC leadership, starting with Alfonso.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Alfonso Ladoni, Scientific Review Branch.
Cindy Lawler, Chief Genes, Environment and Health Branch.
Good morning, Claudia Thompson, Population Health Branch. Good morning, Sharon Beard, Worker Education and Training Branch.
Hey, good morning. I'm Srinath Rathore, Acting Chief Exposure Response and Technology Branch.
Good morning, Michelle Heacock, Hazardous Substance Research Branch.
Now, before we get into Rick's presentation, I would just want to quickly review some Zoom etiquette issues. Most of us have been living a life on Zoom, so this will be a reminder for everyone. First, this is a hybrid meeting, so we've asked the council members in the room to join into the Zoom without their audio on, so that as we're moderating discussion, we can make use of the raise hand feature, so that we will be able to call on questions in order of discussion. This meeting is being webcast. Only the members of staff and council that are in the Zoom will be able to show their camera or unmute themselves. Other participants may make use of the chat feature or send the email to the NAEHS Council website so that we can bring your comments into the conversation. For those in the Zoom, please keep your microphone muted at all times until you are recognized, and then quickly return to mute after you speak. We're asking people to keep their cameras off when they are not actively speaking to preserve bandwidth, and make sure also that you keep your cameras and microphones off during the breaks that we will take. For those on VPN, please turn it off so that you can also preserve bandwidth. At times when council members need to be absent from the discussions for conflict of interest reasons, those on the Zoom will be electronically placed into a Zoom waiting room, or those in person will be asked to exit the meeting room, whichever applies. For those on the Zoom, they do not have to leave the Zoom session. You'll be in a waiting room, and we'll bring you back into the meeting room when the discussion is concluded. Members of the public who wish to express views regarding any items discussed during the open sessions may do so by sending an email to council using the address listed on the council webpage, which is national.advisory.council@niehs.nih.gov. For council members, all voting will be conducted electronically via the council book. And then I'm going to review confidentiality and conflict of interest procedures. So policies and procedures for preventing the conflict of interest and confidentiality of grant materials are contained in the conflict of interest forms, which were emailed to you this morning by Liz McNair, which states, this certifies that in the review of applications or projects conducted by the National Advisory Environmental Health Sciences Council on February 21st to 22nd, 2023, I absented myself and I did not participate in the discussion of nor vote on any applications or projects in which I, or to my knowledge, my spouse, minor child, or close professional associates have a conflict of interest, nor on any applications or projects from an organization or institution where I am an employee, consultant, officer, director, or trustee, am negotiating for employment, or otherwise have a financial interest. In council actions in which we voted en bloc of applications or projects without discussing any individual one, the en bloc actions, my vote did not apply to any applications from any institution fulfilling the criteria in the preceding paragraph. Council members, please sign the certification and email them to Liz. Then I have one additional action item before Rick's presentation, which is the consideration of the 2022 September council meeting minutes. These minutes are available on the NAEHS homepage, and council members were asked to review the minutes for the meeting. They are also included in the electronic council book. May I please have a motion from council to approve the minutes? Irva Hertzberg-Kyoto has moved. Do I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Trevor. Council members, please vote on your approval in the council book. While you're voting, I forgot, I have two of my division leadership members who are on the Zoom. Christy Drew.
Good morning, everybody. Christy Drew, Program Analysis Branch.
And Jenny Greer.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Jenny Greer, Chief of Grants Management.
Thank you. And I apologize for the oversight. Do you have quorum, Liz? Okay,
We have a quorum. That's good.
Excellent. Thank you. Rick?
Okay, terrific. Well, thanks, David. And thanks to all of you for being here. I'd like to take just a few minutes, say over the next, say 30 minutes or so, and update you on what I think are some pretty exciting things that have been happening since the last time we gathered. I guess that was by Zoom last September 2022. So let's go to the next slide, please. But first, a very important piece of business is to recognize the council members who have completed their terms. So Lynn and Terry and Marla, I want to personally thank you for all the time and the effort you've spent on council. It's a lot of work, as I'm sure you know. And I especially appreciated the wisdom and the thoughtfulness that you've all brought to some of the discussions we've had at our council meetings. This ultimately helped me and my colleagues here at NAEHS make the types of decisions to fund different projects that will advance our strategic plan. So again, thank you all, and stay in touch. In fact, I know how to reach out to you in the event that I need additional wisdom and thoughtfulness on some of the things that are happening in the future. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So speaking of funding things, I thought I'd start off with a summary of where we are with the budget for FY23. Overall, it's a good message. Now, all the way on the left, it's the FY22 enacted. We were about $940 million. And it breaks down into our base allocation of 842, 82.5 for the Superfund research program, and $10 million, which is a funding that comes from the Department of Energy to support our worker training program. So as I discussed with you last September, we were looking forward to about between a 3% and a 4% increase in our base budget, both from the President, from the House, and from the Senate. We saw a slight less than 3 to 4% increase in the Superfund program, but nevertheless 82.5 up to $83 million. But what's variable is the amount of money that the President, the House, and the Senate were proposing for support for our the climate change, the health effects of climate change. So the President was proposing 100 million, the House was proposing 10 million, and the Senate was proposing 50 million. Well, where we ended up, we got our budget at the end of December, so we are now just over $1 billion, so 914 million, with $40 million being dedicated to the health effects of climate change. And I'll talk a lot more about that program in just a few minutes. Again, $83 million came in to support the Superfund research program. We got the transfer from the Department of Energy of $10 million, and we also got another $2.5 million to support our disaster relief efforts. So again, we're in good shape. We're just slightly over $1 billion. And now the challenge is to figure out how do we spend that in the way that has the biggest impact on environmental health sciences and biomedical science. Let's go to the next slide, please. So let me take just a few minutes and update you on some of the things that have been happening as we've been interfacing with the White House, the Senate, and the House. Next slide. So a big focus of the effort since last September has been to reach out to several members of Congress to help them understand what's involved in this new effort, NIH-wide effort on the health effects of climate change. So I actually met together with Dr. Bianchi and Gibbons with the Select Committee on Climate Change last September 27th, soon after our council meeting. I also met with the Interior and Environment Appropriations Committee last September 27th. I was joined by members of the Superfund staff and the worker training program staff. I also then reached out together with Dr. Zank and Dr. Puristable on October 4th to Representative Carter, who is a very strong supporter of the NIH and was very interested in the work that we were proposing to support the health effects of climate change, a Democrat from California. On October 13th, I actually was joined by Dr. Gordon and Dr. Gibbons. We had a very engaging discussion with Senator Collins' staff On the 9th, actually, Drs. Rosenthal, Miller, and Coleman, met together with Senator Schatz he's a Democrat from Hawaii, a very engaging discussion. And then it was in December 14th that together with Dr. Gordon and Gibbons, we had an interaction with the staff from Senator Heinrich, who's a Democrat from New Mexico, very interested in the health effects of climate change. And actually, I think it was last week that Dr. Coleman actually had a briefing with Senator Heinrich's staff just to let them know about some of the things that we're proposing for FY23. So overall, I think it was a very engaging set of interactions, lots of different questions. And one of the overall messages that we got back is that, wow, it's really great to see that it's not just one institute going forward in a siloed manner. This whole notion of developing an NIH-wide strategy where we're bringing together the expertise and the interest of actually most of the ICs across the NIH, it was a message that was very well received by the staff. So again, this is, I think, all in support of ultimately, we didn't get the $100 million that we were hoping from the president's budget, but I think the sense was that 40 million would be a step in the right direction to at least launch some catalytic efforts to get this program going. Next slide, please. I also want to call to your attention, I think we all recognize there was an election last November, and there are now many new members in key leadership positions in Congress. So Kay Granger and Rosa DeLauro are the chair and the ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee. Patty Murray and Susan Collins. Patty is the chair, and Susan is what we call the vice chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. Of course, any money that we get at the NIH ultimately goes through those committees. But very specifically, the funding we get for our base appropriation goes through the House Labor HHS Appropriations Subcommittee, which is chaired by Robert Alderholt and Rosa DeLauro. Actually, Rosa is an incredibly strong supporter of the work that happens at the NIH. And the Senate Labor HHS Appropriations Subcommittee is chaired by Tammy Baldwin, and Shelley Moore Capito is the ranking member. So best we can tell is that in the past the Congress has been very supportive of the work at the NIH, and the best we can tell that these key leaders in Congress are also very supportive of the work that we do. So let's keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully once again we'll see a lot of support for the NIH. Next slide. But I also want to point out that we do get that $83 million in support of our Superfund research program. And that actually comes through the House Interior and Environment Appropriations Subcommittee, which is chaired by Mike Simpson and Shelley Pingree. Shelley is a Democrat from Maine. And the Senate Interior and Environment Appropriations Subcommittee is chaired by Jeff Merkley and Lisa Murkowski. So again, I'm not going to go in further detail, but best we can tell is that the new leadership and key committees and appropriations committees and subcommittees in Congress are supportive of the work that we do. And I will continue to work with my colleagues to make sure that they're aware of some of the exciting new initiatives in environmental health sciences as we go forward. So let's go to the next slide. I also want to point out that actually it's really good news that President Biden has nominated, I think it was a total of 6 different individuals to the White House National Cancer Advisory Board. So one of the individuals that was nominated is a Dr. Navas Asian, who is a physician epidemiologist. She studies arsenic and other metals. She is the director of our Superfund research program at Columbia, and she leads multiple NIEHS funded projects. So this is really good news for us, because this National Cancer Advisory Board works together with Monica Bertinelli, who's the director of NCI, to help set the course for the National Cancer Research Program. Now, I can also, as I've mentioned, I think in the past, I've had conversations with Ned Sharpless, the former director of the NCI. Ned was very supportive of working more collaboratively with NIEHS for the reason that the environmental exposures do affect cancer outcomes. And I'm also pleased to tell you that Dr. Bertinelli is very interested in working with us. And I'll talk to you about some very specific things that Michelle Heacock is taking a leadership role here on reaching out with the NCI to develop some very tangible collaborative opportunities. So again, I think this is really good news for us. Next slide. So let me go on now and talk about strategic planning. So next slide. So I think as all, well, hopefully you're all aware that we do have a strategic plan in place. The mission of NAEHS is part of the strategic plan. The mission is to discover how the environment affects people in order to promote healthier lives. And our vision is to provide global leadership for innovative research that improves public health by preventing disease and disability. Now, there are three different themes that are part of our current strategic plan. So it's environmental health sciences, which is a very large theme, which fundamentally means that we study the biological or the networks and the biochemical pathways that ultimately drive human biology, and to better understand how environmental perturbations interface with those pathways and networks. We also have a theme of data to knowledge to action, which means that we take the knowledge that we generated and we put it to work for the benefit of public health. And there's also the third theme is scientific stewardship and support, which means that we also have to pay attention to the issues of personnel, issues around repositories, data repositories, and other resources that we all need to enable the science that we do in NAEHS supported activities. So when I first became director in June of 2020, unlike many other IC directors who immediately launched a strategic planning effort, I didn't do that for the reason that, look, I was the deputy director under Dr. Birnbaum, and I worked together with Dr. Birnbaum to create the current strategic plan. And I thought, actually, it still works pretty well for us. So, but then on the other hand, it's now approaching 2023, and it's time to begin to think about creating an update of the plan for the next 5 years. Next slide. So this next phase of the strategic planning, we're going to talk a lot about this. In fact, Dr. Newton, I don't know where she was here, but she'll be leading some of the discussions tomorrow afternoon. There she is in the back of the room. And we'll talk about this strategic planning. This will cover 2024 to 2028. Now, I've discussed this with our senior leadership, and we want a strategic plan that dovetails nicely with some of the parameters that we have to abide by coming from the NIH. So we decided that we're going to stick with these three different themes: advancing environmental health sciences, promoting translation, and stewardship and support. But going forward, what we need is engagement from members of council and engagement from all of you across the environmental health sciences community to try to figure out where is science going. You know, I often talk with the senior leadership committee around the Gretzky issue of where's the hockey puck going to be. So we want to make sure that we're doing the things today and tomorrow and over the course of the next 5 years so that we can position the environmental health sciences community to be having the greatest impact. So we may have to revise some of our goals, you know, fill gaps in our knowledge and adjust priorities as necessary. So next slide. So the initial phase, very similar to what we've done in the last couple of rounds, is we want input from all of you. So there's an online input tool that is currently available. It's now open. So we encourage you, if you have something to say, this is an opportunity to let us know what's on your mind. We're also going to be doing a virtual open space. Now, you may recall that at least in 2011, when soon after getting here, we had a non-virtual, an in-person virtual space. We had several hundred people meeting at the Sheraton close to the airport. And that was, I think it convinced us all that that's a fabulous way of getting input from across the environmental health sciences community. And from that, we use information from that to help to establish some of the goals. Now, we don't have the ability to accommodate everyone. So Dr. Newton and I, together with other members of senior leadership, have looked carefully at a list of about 300 individuals that we will invite to participate in the virtual open space meeting, which will be on April 11th, 12th, and then on 14th. So we'll also be looking for key inputs that we're getting as a result of some of the workshops that we've had over the course of the last several years. So as far as the time frame is concerned, from June of 2023 to February 2024, so we're going to be analyzing the inputs, creating a draft of goals for the senior leadership committee and me to review. We'll circulate this to members of council for your review and for your comments. We'll post this to the public sites in late 2023. Then assemble comments, revise the draft plans as necessary based on the comments that we're getting, and then circulating it back to council. So we're hoping that we can finalize this in April or June of 2024, which will again set us up for 2024 through 2028. Next slide. So I also want to comment that we are continuing to support the National Academies Committee on Emerging Science for Environmental Health Decisions. I think the engagement with this committee has started with my predecessor, Dr. Birnbaum, and it may have been actually prior to her, but this committee has hosted workshops that have been seminal in building several new areas, or building knowledge of several new areas of environmental health sciences. I mean, they've had workshops on, the exposome. I don't know, Gary, you probably have part of a few of these in the past. Environmental epigenetics, predictive computational toxicology, microphysiological systems. So there's been a lot of really useful information coming out of that National Academy Committee that has been incorporated into our strategic plans, and we expect that the same thing will be true on this next round. Now, I did meet with the leadership of the committee, and just to let them know that we're going to be engaging in the strategic planning. But also one thing that I'm personally very passionate about is making sure that we get environmental health sciences out into the community, broad-based biomedical research enterprise. So one thing that I hope that will emerge as we have a new strategic plan, that there will be more potentially disease-focused research and other ICs across the NIH, where they factor the environment into the equation of studying the etiology of human disease. So I think the leadership of the committee understood that and may be inviting more participation from other ICs across the NIH in some of the workshops going forward. Next slide. So we've been making a lot of progress on the existing strategic plans. So next slide. So I thought what I would do is, and I've shared this with you the last couple of times we've met, there are several areas, what I call strategic focus. So the Senior Leadership Committee and I have been meeting on it's a monthly basis where we have a half day where we have a leadership retreat. And more recently, we've been talking a lot about the environmental justice, health disparities, DEIA issues, and there's a lot to talk about there. But we've also talked about precision environmental health, the exposome, climate change and health, computational biology, data science, and mechanistic and translational toxicology. What are the things that we can be doing? And what are some of the investments we can be making now under the current strategic plan that can help to position us to be successful in these? So let's click, please. Now, I don't have time to go over all of this today. I want to focus on precision environmental health, exposome, climate change and health, and environmental justice and health disparities. Let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about exposomics. So next slide. So just to remind everyone that the exposome was originally defined by Chris Wilde back in 2005. I think most of us in the environmental health sciences community embraced the notion, because if we truly want to understand the impact of the environment, it can't be one exposure at a time. So this is about the totality of exposures over the life course. And I think we also understand that some of those exposures early in development, actually preconception, may be critically important for determining health effects much later in life. So the exposome is really about, in the lower panel here, it's not just about air pollution and not just about pesticides. We need to develop strategies where we factor all of these things into the equation, but we also, as part of the exposome framework, have to factor in the social, the ecosystem, and the lifestyle variables that all contribute to environmental contributions to human health. Next slide. So as we all heard, actually, I think it was a couple of years ago, Gary, we were actually, you were here virtually, if I remember correctly. But it's complicated. So many of my colleagues across the rest of the NIH don't really understand, how do you do an exposomics experiment? If it's the totality of exposures over the life course, how do we collect data for the exposome? So Gary has been advocating the notion of we need an operational definition. So how do you collect data for the exposome? But I think he also argued that there are probably some new technologies that we'd have to develop. But he also, I think, if I remember you correctly, you were talking about the pragmatic exposome. Let's do the things, let's start it off doing the things that we can do right now. And actually, I've been doing a lot of exploration on this. For example, high resolution mass spec is an incredibly powerful tool to use for exposomics research. So the other, and I can't remember if it's Gary or it's mine, but we can potentially model this on what happened in the genomics community over the last several decades. Genomics was about going beyond one gene at a time. And some of the early technologies, some of those synthetic microarrays, we spotted cDNA clones on cDNAs on microscopes. Like, those are pretty primitive compared to the single cell RNA-seq that we can do now. But nevertheless, it was a start. And so it advanced the whole field of genomics. And now we have incredible capabilities in genomics that I don't think anyone would have predicted that we would have back when this all started. So let's model it on the genomics community. Let's be bold about the things we can do now, and let's be bold about some of the technological needs that we would have in the future to help us enable and operationalize exposomics. Next slide. So I mentioned this last time. So as a tangible step in the direction of operationalizing the exposomics, let's get people together and let's start talking about this. So under the leadership of Michelle Bennett last summer, with Alex Torres and actually several members of the organizing committee, including Gary and so actually several of you on council, we had a series of workshops. Next slide. So these happened between July 22nd and August 26th, focusing on a number of different topic areas. And next slide. And it was pretty remarkable. There's a lot of interest in operationalizing the exposome. So over 400 different colleagues joined for all or part of, actually many people joined for all 5 workshops. There were 64 different topics that were raised and discussed. And at a final session on August 34th, 85 colleagues identified their priorities. So if you're interested, the minutes from all of these sessions are available online. So next slide. So after the September Council, we invited all members of council to engage in what we called the Exposomic Summit. And that's where we talked about where are we going with this. So there were a number of different topic clusters that emerged from the Exposomic series. What do we measure? How do we measure it? Share and harmonize the data, integrate, analyze, interpret, translate, and impact. So there were 64 different issues that were identified by the community to cover the full landscape of exposomics as it was discussed. So next slide. And so just in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of the different details, but there are 5 different themes, 10 high priority areas to operationalize exposomics. And next slide. And so there will be a special issue of the exposome. So we happen to have the inaugural editor-in-chief on our council, Gary. And so there will be a number of different topics that we will be talking about. Key elements for an exposome study, a federated data ecosystem for exposomics, use community-level exposomics to address health disparities and inequality, advanced data science approaches for exposome-wide association studies, and the role of nutrition and pharmacology and toxicology in exposomics. So I look forward to hearing more of the details. In fact, during the Q&A, Gary, if you're so inclined, you can just add a few more details. But most importantly, I want to add a comment here, and I want to call your attention to a presentation that Yusha Shui will be giving a little bit later on in council. And this is a research concept. It's about global exposome research coordination to accelerate precision environmental health. So this is a new concept that we hope will actually help to create a community of practice around the issues of exposomic science and actually continue to advance this whole concept of how do we operationalize the exposome. So if you're interested, actually, hopefully you should be, I want to encourage you, you'll be on here in just a little bit. I look forward to that. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about precision environmental health. And so let's go to the next slide. So again, as you probably all remember, this was originally defined in a council presentation by Walker, Baccarelli, and Dolinoy. And this is really about addressing strategies that we can use to address the individual variability associated with environmental exposures. So it complements precision medicine, but unlike precision medicine, which is all about genomics and genes, genes play a role, but all of this environmental stuff and potentially epigenetics also plays a role. And then hopefully the goal is to better understand individual risk to prevent disease. So at the end of their presentation to council, Cheryl commented that, precision environmental health is about integrating genetics, epigenetics, environment, and omics data. So G by E by D. Next slide. So if we want to get to the gene part, that's, every element of the G by E by D is complicated. But the gene part is whether it's a gene variant in a different genetic background or an epigenetic variant of a gene. What's clear is that the genes and the epigenetics driving differential responses to the environment fall into the category of complex traits. So it's not just any single gene with a variant or a single gene that has an epigenetic modifications. It's likely, like many other complex traits, to be 10, if not 100, maybe even thousands of different genes that all contribute to this differential susceptibility. So how do we do this? This is a big task for the environmental health sciences community. Well, I think it could be easier if we join forces with what's called the International Common Disease Alliance. Now, again, I've talked about this in past meetings. This is an effort, a international, global effort to try to standardize the way that the genetics and genomics community collect data from tens of millions of members of various cohorts. So if we collected data in a way where we can seamlessly integrate it together, we can take advantage of these tens of millions of individuals to really sort out some of the complex traits associated with common disease. But here, my point is that if we actually add to the phenotyping of those individuals environmental exposures and the effect of, say, air pollution, that will be incredibly helpful for us for our precision environmental health. So we've actually been doing that. Actually, many members of our staff here have been reaching out to the ICDA and alerting them to the importance of factoring the environment into the equation. And very specifically, we are developing a very strong partnership with Josh Denny, who is the CEO of the All of Us program, which is the ICDA version of this at the NIH, as well as with Jeff Ginsburg, who is the scientific and medical director of the All of Us program. And of course, we have Jan Hall, our clinical director, as well as Ellison Matzinger-Reif, who's the chief of our biostatistics and computational biology branch, working on a program called PEGS. I'll talk about that in a second here. So I think we're making progress, making these genetics and genomics efforts aware of the importance of integrating environment into their discussions. So next slide, please. So the good news is that actually the All of Us program is sufficiently interested that Josh Denny and Jeff Ginsburg actually came to NAEHS. We had a workshop last July, and there were 120 different experts in environmental health, data privacy, biostatistics, climate change, epigenetics, genomics, epidemiology, and there was a very robust interaction about what we can be doing and how the environmental health sciences can be interfacing with these genetics and genomics efforts. The next slide. So there was a lot of discussion about ancillary studies. So these are studies where we would either add participants to the existing recruitment for All of Us, or there's new data that we collect on some of the existing participants. So there are currently 17 different ancillary study recommendations that the groups are pondering. And so at some point, we'll have a discussion to figure out what specifically can we be doing. So let's go to the next slide. Let's go on to the next slide in the interest of time. So I do want to call your attention to the PEGS overview. So this is the Personalized Environment and Gene Study. Actually, this precedes the All of Us program, and I really want to applaud Jan Hall and Ellison Matzinger-Reif for their leadership, as well as others here at NIEHS. This is all, it's about 20,000 different individuals. It's about genotyping, in many cases, whole genome sequencing. It's about phenotyping for self-reported diseases, electronic health records. But most importantly, all the way on the right, it's also about the environment. And they have health and exposure surveys for the internal, the external exposome. In fact, some of the more recent publications that are coming out are actually pointing to, I think, what many of us would predict, that the environmental variables are probably even more important than some of the genetic variables in predicting disease outcomes. So again, it's you'll be hearing more about the PEGS program here at NIEHS. Next slide. So let's talk about climate change and health. So there's been a lot of work on this. Next slide. And so just to remind you that
With the changing of the administrations, President Biden issued Executive Order 14008. This is about tackling climate crisis at home and abroad. There's a $40 million allocation to NAEHS. But again, the approach that we've taken is not just about NAEHS, but engaging across the NIH to make things happen. And that's because there's a lot of interest in remarkable capabilities in several of the ICs across the NIH. So several of us have kind of coalesced to form what we call the executive committee. So Dr. Bianchi at CHD, Dr. Gibbons at NHLBI. It was originally Dr. Glass, but now Dr. Glass is retired. So Dr. Kilmarks has stepped in as the the acting director of Fogarty. Dr. Gordon at Mental Health, Per Stable at NIMHD, and Dr. Zank and myself. So what we've done is we've re-energized a working group that's co-chaired by Aubrey Miller and Josh Rosenthal. And Gwen Coleman is providing just remarkable coordination. It's a lot of work when you get all of these different ICs, and we all want to be working together in a very productive way. Next slide. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here because I've shared this with you in the past, but the working group has developed a strategy, a scientific, a strategic framework for addressing the health effects of climate change. So the details on this are on nih.gov/climate and health. So if you're interested, I encourage you to take a look. But the key element here is that there are 4 core elements: health effects research, health equity, training and capacity building, and intervention science. And it's going to be done with a good dose of global cross-sector interagency and community partnerships. The health effects of climate change is complicated, and it requires lots of different disciplines coming together, working collaboratively together. So again, I encourage you to take a look at the strategic framework. Next slide. And in fact, there are several different elements in FY22 before we had an allocation that the members of the executive committee and some of the other IC directors have basically decided this is an important enough thing for us to be doing. So even though we don't have new money from Congress, let's see if we can cobble together some resources and to develop some strategies for developing, say, a research coordinating center for climate change and health. Also, an opportunity to engage and develop an alliance for community engagement, climate and health. I think we come to recognize that getting the communities engaged in these efforts is critically important. There are also efforts to get the NOCs out, both to all ICs and IC directors, and the importance of unsolicited grants coming in to support the health effects of climate change, including SBIR and STTR applications. Next slide. So just very briefly, so the Research Coordinating Committee is really about developing a community of practice around the health effects of climate change. And the idea is that the RCC would catalyze those transdisciplinary research efforts to really make it possible to address the multiple facets of the health effects of climate change. Next slide. So there are several different goals, and just in the interest of time, you have the slides, you can take a look at this, but I think the most important element here is it's really about developing a community of practice around the health effects of climate change, promoting novel and innovative resources, as well as promoting the transdisciplinary collaboration that's going to be necessary to make all of this happen. Next slide. So it's we've had a funding opportunity here, timeline. There was an RFA that was released last June of 2022. And we hope that we'll be talking about this in the closed session, and hopefully awards can be made in March of 2023. So stay tuned. Next slide. Also on the issue of community engagement, the executive committee and the working group recognizes community engaged climate. We absolutely must have teams that are engaged with communities. And the communities that need to be engaged are those that are disproportionately affected by the social determinants of health disparities, and climate change. So 16 different proposals were received. 4 awards have been made. Next slide. Just very quickly here, we have the University of Alaska dealing with indigenous Alaska natives in rural and remote Alaska. Also, the University of Colorado in Boulder is working with people with lower income, communities of color, immigrant groups, and groups working vulnerable jobs near Denver. Also, USC was one of the award recipients, dealing with families with lower incomes, immigrant groups, people of color, unhoused and older persons in LA and Carson County. And then Public Health Institute, which deals with American Indian tribal immigrant populations, rural and agricultural workers in Lake County, California. Let's go to the next slide. So again, it's you have the slides. You can take a look at this. It's really about community engagement, research, and outreach, and getting communities actively involved, and getting the communities that are most directly affected by the impacts of climate change, getting them involved in the research effort. Next slide. So I also want to mention a very innovative approach that Dr. Coleman and the steering committee and others are making on climate change, is that we know we don't have all of the knowledge in the area of climate change. So they've launched this very innovative, it's called the NIH Climate and Health Scholars Program. It's all about getting key subject matter expert external to the NIH, getting them into the NIH and to help us with developing plans and implementing on our existing plans. Next slide. So again, you have the slides. You can take a peek at this. It's about bringing scientists actively into the NIH. $350,000, a modest amount of money, was actually allocated by the Office of the Director at the NIH. So Dr. Tabak and Dr. Schwetz have provided this money in FY22. Again, it's to bring people from the academic and private sectors to the NIH to be working together with intramural, extramural, and policy offices and program management options. Next slide. So there are several awardees, and again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to name them individually. You can take a look at the slides, but congratulations to all of them. And you will also notice, and one of them is coming to NIEHS, but the rest are going to be interfacing with our colleagues at several ICs across the NIH. Next slide. I also want to, just in the remaining few minutes here, talk about a very important initiative that was led by Aubrey Miller and his colleagues, shown on the bottom here. This is about climate change and patient-centered health outcomes. This is all about creating a resource that researchers can use to identify and reduce the health effects associated with environmental or climate-related events and improve patient and population health outcomes. So this is an HHS-funded program. It's $4 million over 3 years, and it really supports the framework that we've developed as part of the NIH-wide effort on the health effects of climate change. Next slide. So again, you've seen the slide. You can take a look at some of the objectives, and we're very excited that this is additional funding that will help us achieve some of the goals that we laid out as part of our program. Next slide. So I also want to point out that Dr. Zeldin, together with some of the other, Dr. Zeldin is one of our scientific directors here, together with other scientific directors throughout the NIH. They've developed a program. It's called the Intramural Targeted Climate Change and Health Program, or it's abbreviated ITCH. So this program is all about engaging some of the subject matter experts and the incredible capabilities that we have within the intramural program to contribute to working on the goals for the health effects of climate change. So we were able to provide actually quite a bit of the funding for this came from the, initially, I think it was from Dr. Gottesman's office, but more recently from Dr. Shore. As part of the intramural research program, we contributed some funding to this. And so there were some modest grants that are being provided to a number of investigators across the NIH to, again, promote the idea that the intramural program would have much to contribute. Well, I do want to add that we recognize that the intramural effort will be a modest effort. So the bulk of the money from the $40 million will be going to the extramural community. Next slide. These are some of the awardees, so congratulations to them. Actually, congratulations to Dale Sandler here at NIEHS. And you can take a look at it on the slides. Next slide. So we've done a lot. So the environmental justice and health disparities. Next slide. So let me just summarize this. I think as most of you know, NIEHS has an extensive history of studying and working on environmental justice and health disparities. I think a lot of this started, especially during the tenure of Dr. Ken Olden when he was director of NIEHS. We've done a lot, but there's still a lot that needs to be done. Next slide. And so what the Senior Leadership Committee here has done is we created what we call a faculty on health disparities and environmental justice. This is chaired by Darlene Dixon in the DTT, Joan Pakenham in DIR, Liam O'Fallon in DERT, and Sharon Beard. And there are a number of specific things that the faculty does. It's just, and I want to point out that the last bullet point is really raise the profile of environmental health disparities and environmental justice research across the NIEHS and the NIH. Next slide. And part of what they do is they actually interface with members of our communities and learn more about what needs to be done. They actually bring this to the roundtable with myself and our deputy director, Trevor Archer. And then we plan community forums where it's an opportunity for me to get out there and to meet with the communities that are experiencing health disparities and environmental justice. So it's a firsthand knowledge of what happens. And all the way on the right, I don't know if you can see me, it's in the upper right-hand corner, that's actually me there at one of the community forums, listening to what this particular community, this was in Cincinnati. So next slide. And I'm seeing that what I've had a chance to actually visit with community members. That's part of the Texas A&M University P42 Center, the community engagement. It's always very interesting. And actually, if you have questions, I'm happy to talk to you more about the very interesting tour along the Toxic Tour, which is the route between Houston and the Gulf of Mexico. So a lot of health disparity communities that are impacted by the bumper to bumper petroleum plants that are located along that stretch of highway. Next slide. But what's also clear is that what the co-chairs of the faculty have done is pointed out to me that we've never done a community forum in Central North Carolina. And we need to fix that. And we need to fix it because there are very significant issues of environmental justice. So what they are doing is working together with me and actually Sharon Beard and see if I can see others. But the issue is, what can we be doing for environmental justice communities in our backyard? And what we decided is that we're going to go forward with a novel form of a community engagement. So it's not about the community engagement through our P42 or P30 centers. We want to go directly to the community and empower them to put together a strategy, and we have to see what they want. I can tell you, I've heard from them, and they're very interested that there may be elements of research, but they want action. Okay, so actually, to the credit of the faculty, they brought these workshops, and there are people in Mebane. In fact, next slide. There's the Western Electric site. I don't know, Andrew, are you familiar with this site? If you're not, you should be, because this is a site where, you know, the data is in its documentation that people living close to this site are experiencing health disparities. And so this community doesn't want to hear more about research that we want to do. They want to get the job done. They want it cleaned up. So what the faculty is doing is trying to organize a workshop. So I can be there, but we need to engage people. Hopefully, Andrew, you can help Administrator Regan join me. Let's get in front of this group and then tell them what we're going to do to clean up their communities. So next slide. I also wanted to quickly comment here that Dr. Archer has, our relatively new deputy director, has stepped in an interim role to provide leadership for our division of translational toxicology. We currently have applications. We currently have a search out for the next permanent director of the DTT. So if you're interested, I encourage you to take a look at the NIH Executive Careers webpage. So thank you for Trevor to stepping in the interim. We're actually hoping to be able to identify another interim acting director, but we're trying to do this in a way that has transparency, and we provide opportunities to other members of the staff at NIEHS. Next slide. So I'm not going to have a chance to go in and talk about some of the things that are happening, but Michelle Heacock has been working with Ron Johnson at the NCI around some very exciting, very tangible things going forward, workshops, things that will help to set the stage for what we can be doing collaborating together with the NCI. I've been working with Walter Koroshetz and others at NINDS and our neuroscience institutes to come up with very specific ways to bring exposomics to their awareness and integrate it into the work that gets done in neuroscience. And we're also working with NHGRI. So much when we collect omics data, we look at the role of the transcriptome, or we look at the role of the metabolome. What needs to happen is to integrate across all of the different omes, including exposome, to really figure out how all of these things can be contributing to health. So let's go ahead a few slides here. And okay. Just the last thing I want to comment on, well, last thing is, and you can ask me questions about the new ARPA-H. It's very exciting, the things that are happening with the new director of ARPA-H, who's been appointed since last September when we met. She is an incredible intellect coming, and I think that there is a lot of interest in potentially working with the Environmental Health Sciences Committee. Last thing is just to remind everyone that as of, what was it, January 25th, we now have, next slide, we have a data sharing mandatory plan. So if any things that get funded after January 25th, 2023, it's a mandatory data sharing plan. The next slide. So the staff at DERT has made it easy for you. There's a website. So if you're interested in knowing what does this mean for you, I encourage you to take a look at the website. Next slide. And actually, that's a lot of this I want to call to your attention. Chris Duncan and DERT has taken the lead. There's also a new funding opportunity around developing, extending, adapting, and refining data and metadata standards associated with the environmental health sciences. So next slide, and then next slide. So thank you. And we don't have a lot of additional time here. Initially, I was planning on an hour, but we thought, well, we forgot to plan some time for lunch. So we can take, I think, a couple of questions now. If that's okay with you, David.
Yeah, we have 8 minutes for questions.
Oh, okay.
Again, just a
More
reminder
time
to
than
council
I thought.
members that
Okay.
we would like for you to use the Zoom raise hand feature to be able to queue up the conversation.
Okay. Maybe people are hungry.
Gary.
So is the environment being considered in ARPA-H?
The answer is absolutely. So now you've asked a question, I can expand a bit on this. So Renee Wagerson, who's the new director of ARPA-H, actually gave a presentation to the IC directors last Thursday. And I was very excited about this. And it turns out one of the advantages of actually being in Bethesda at the time these happened, which I ran into her in the hallway afterward. Hey, Renee, have you heard about the exposome and some of the things? So I think there's a lot of interest at ARPA-H around some of the technological needs that we have within the environmental health sciences community. So stay tuned on that, but I think there's a lot of interest in figuring out how can we use some of those capabilities at ARPA-H for the work that we do.
Is there a timeline for when they'll be kind of launching their initiatives?
Yeah, so it's that maybe I can cover that in June, but she actually went through lots of details on that. But stay tuned. This is all happening in real time, and typical of the DARPA-like models. I mean, they develop metrics, and next week we're going to do this, and 2 weeks from now we're going to have this done. So stay tuned. This is going to happen pretty quickly, and so they don't have as much money as they were hoping to have, but they have $2.5 billion that were appropriated in the FY23 budget. So there's a lot of different things that are happening. But I think the key thing that they're doing now is staffing up these, what they're called the program managers. So these are the people that are on the ground. So if there's someone who will be working on environmental health or exposomics, there will be a person whose expertise is in exposomics that'll be working to putting out the calls for applications. But unlike the typical the work at the NIH, where you go through a study section of this, and then several months later, you get awards sometimes. With ARPA-H, this is going to happen in very much real time. She had commented that they apparently have special hiring authority. So you can talk to someone on Friday about Jay, believe it or not, so you can talk to someone on Friday and you can actually hire them on Monday. They can start work on Monday. So it's a new schema for doing things. So stay tuned. But I was actually pretty excited by that hallway conversation. Other questions or comments?
So next up is Irva.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear you elaborate a little bit more on the NCI collaboration.
Yeah, so the NCI, so previously, Ned Sharpless and I met and we talked about the importance of the environment. And so Ned was very agreeable. We have to start developing those programs where we can factor that into the equation. So it's not just about genetic predisposition from the genes you inherit from your parents, there are environmental exposures. So developing a robust strategy around that is what we're interested in. Now, Michelle has actually stepped to the plate. So, and in fact, I don't know, Michelle, if you're willing to kind of comment here, we have limited time, but she has stepped to the plate. So she's working with Ron Johnson. They have a working group and they meet on is it a monthly basis? And they're developing specific strategies. So there was a workshop last week and there will be a workshop in June around really integrating environmental exposures into the way we plan our work on cancer and that the NCI plans its work on cancer. So Michelle, is there a website where, so how does Irva get access to both the proceedings of the meeting that happened last week, as well as the schedule of the workshop that will be happening in June?
Thank you for your interest in that, Irva. So the workshop will have a recording and the slides will be posted. So I can send you that email if you're interested. And I guess for everybody, we can maybe put the link on. And the other workshop that's being planned in June, we're fast in the details of that. So just be expecting more information soon. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So it's again, I'm very excited about the interest in the environment. And I think as many of you, as I've told you in the past, I'm personally very interested in bringing greater awareness to the importance of the environment and studying the etiology of human disease across the board. And I also if I had time, would tell you about this fabulous workshop that we had at the American Neurological Association meeting last October. And that was Walter Korschetz and I, co-chaired that workshop. And it's a group of neurologists who I think for the first time, it really became aware of the importance of some of those pesticide exposures and some of the things that happen from environmental exposures as they predispose to the development of Parkinson's, ALS, and a whole variety of other. So there was a lot of enthusiasm. So we will continue to build on that. In fact, I will be attending a dinner of the Society for Neuroscience I think it's next month, which will be in Washington. So just, again, bringing this awareness forward, and Francis Jensen, who's the president of the ANA, and Walter Korschetz have been very supportive. Well, many of you heard Walter because he gave a presentation at Council about a year and a half ago about the exposome and neuroscience. And you'll hear tomorrow from Richard Hodis about the exposome and aging. So we're getting the word out, and I think it's pretty exciting.
So we do have about 2 minutes left, and we have 2 questions in the queue. So
Okay.
we'll do Trevor and then Andrew fairly quickly, please.
Microphone, please. Yep.
Rick, very nice presentation. I'd be remiss not to update you on where we are with the Intercenter Working Group on Climate Change and Human Health. As you know, many of the P30 centers actually felt it was a good idea to pool resources in terms of tackling this pressing issue. Our initial foray into this got 12 centers involved. We're now up to 20 centers involved. We have now conducted a survey of all the researchers going on those 20 centers so that we can match needs across center program. We're going to be communicating through a Slack site, which is almost constructed. We asked originally for 2 or 3 members per center, which would give us about 60 members. We're over 140 people now who want to join the Slack group to share best practices. So I thought I'd just give you an update on that. One comment I do have is with this $40 million that's going into climate change and human health, is there any thought being put into how these grants will be reviewed?
Yeah, well, that's so we're at the point right now. We received notification of the appropriation the last week in December. And so we've been scrambling now with, how do we spend the money in FY23 and beyond? And I really want to applaud Gwen, together with her colleagues on the steering committee. we're not at a point where we can reveal any of the details yet, but things are beginning to emerge, and we'll be taking this to the executive committee in our meeting at the end of February. And Gwen, anything specifically you want to comment on this? I think we're at a point where it just would be premature.
I would urge that there be a special emphasis panel to review these grants rather than to go to ordinary study sections.
Well, Gwen, do you want to comment on that?
I was just going to say that if you watch the NIH website that Rick alluded to, there'll be updates on various funding announcements coming out over the next couple of months.
Great.
Just stay tuned, and it's just, I'm actually pretty energized by the discussions that we're having. Lots of different ideas coming forth, and $40 million is a nice chunk of change, but it's not a lot of money. And so the challenge is, how do we use this money in a way that can catalyze bigger and bolder efforts? So the things, for example, that we could use some of the money to help catalyze some of the multidisciplinary efforts among the centers. So again, nothing is specifically laid out yet, but trying to figure that out. How do we use the modest amount of money now, and then hopefully demonstrating to Congress that actually we spent the money well in FY23, and that maybe in FY24 and beyond, there may be some additional money we would add to the base. So, okay. Was there one more question, David?
One more question from Andrew Geller.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Rick. And we can probably just set these up on the stack for later discussion. I'm curious about processes that you may have developed to channel grants, particularly through the Alliance for Community Engagement program, to HBCUs or other MSIs and communities themselves, which we know is part of our efforts in EJ, and whether this is actually linked to the Cross IC Compass program, or is this separate? So that's probably my first question or comment. My second having to do with the forum you're proposing to hold in North Carolina, who the point of contact would be for that, because I would need as much detail as possible and need to get in contact with both the administrator as well as Region 4.
Gwen, I see you have your hand on the button. Do you want to take a stab at the first question?
So the short answer, since we have to go to lunch, is that the Alliance for Community Engagement for Climate Change builds on the platform for the SEAL program, which came out of COVID. And Andrew, I'd be happy to tell you more about it at lunch or another time. And then I'll go back to you.
Yeah, actually, Sharon, do you want to make a quick comment about addressing the second question? So who do we expect will be there for this? And it's in my mind, it's not just Rick, because we don't clean up sites. But Sharon, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I just wanted to say we've been working with the community-based organizations, and they're developing an alliance to work together with us. And myself, Joan Packingham, Darlene Dixon, and Lim O'Fallon, along with Dr. Wachek and Dr. Archer, are working to develop a framework with them to get this started and utilize the NAEHS forum process, so community forum process. So you can certainly communicate with me, but we can certainly work it out. But it's definitely led by the faculty working together to try to address some of the issues that came out of the addressing racism as a public health issue that we had a workshop back in December of 2021. So it's a continue.
Great.
Thank
Andrew
you.
Sharon.beard@nih.gov, and CC me, please.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I know Omega Wilson at WIRA and the others will be very active.
Yep.
Very enthusiastic.
And they clearly, they made it clear to me that they've told us what their problems are, and they were looking for now kind of a change in course. They want their communities cleaned up. And the question is, who in the federal government, who in the state government, who in the local government needs to be at the table to listen to the concerns and to collectively develop a strategy to clean up their environment. Great. Okay. Other comments or questions?
I think on that note, we need to be breaking for lunch. So as Rick alluded in his comments, we noticed last week when we decided we could in fact do the in-person portion, that we didn't ever change the plan from having a working lunch while we were purely virtual, as we've done for the last 3 years. So we are shifted the agenda just a little bit to give us a half an hour for those of us on site to grab some lunch and eat it before we come back. I am going to begin speaking promptly at 12:40. So
12:40, okay. Thanks, everyone.